Weather.
A long and at times heated campaign has reached the finish line. Our live election night coverage starts right now.
Hello and welcome to Studio 10, our election headquarters for our live election night coverage. I'm Ashton Ackman.
And I'm Ella Rhodes. There are hundreds of races all across the country. Who will control Congress for the next 2 years?
Our election power panel will be here for the next few hours to break down results from key races and to discuss what issues mattered most in this election.
And we have partnered with WIUX and the IDS to bring you the most comprehensive analysis of this consequential election.
There's a lot at stake tonight. Republicans are hoping to gain control of Congress. Since losing the Senate in 2020, they need to gain at least one seat in that chamber.
Control of the House also hangs in the balance. Republicans need to pick up 6 seats there to gain control for the first time since 2018.
It is 8 o'clock in the East and polls are about to close in 16 states, including crucial battleground races like Florida and Pennsylvania.
But first, we want to get you up to date on the results from the last hour, in which 9 states have closed their polls, including right here in the Hoosier State. We start in the hotly contested race for Georgia Senate. It is currently too early to call. However, Raphael Warnock does have the lead currently. Georgia is one of several key races that could determine who controls the Senate. And the Indiana Senate race is also too early to call. Incumbent Republican Todd Young is running against Democrat Tom McDermott. AP also projects that Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is heading back to the United States Senate. Paul was a candidate in 2016 for president. He defeats Democrat Charles Booker. And over in South Carolina, the Senate is in. Republican Tim Scott claims the win against Democratic candidate Crystal Matthews. Vermont Senate has also been called. AP projects that Democrat Peter Welch will win that race to fill the open seat. And here's where things stand in the Senate at this hour. Republicans have 31 seats and Democrats have 35. Again, 51 is needed for either party to gain control. Polls also closed at 7:30 in 3 states, including Ohio, North Carolina, where there are 2 hotly contested Senate races there. In the North Carolina Senate race, it is currently too early to call. Republican Congressman Ted Budd faces off against Democrat Cheryl Beasley. Both are looking to fill their seat after Republican incumbent Richard Burr is not seeking re-election. The Ohio Senate seat is also an open seat after Republican Rob Portman decided not to run for another term. Republican venture capitalist J.D. Vance is running against Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan. This race has been neck and neck in the polls throughout the campaign, but Vance does have the edge in the polls going into Election Day. That race is currently too early to call. Right, and that's going to be a lot of the beginning of the night, but don't worry, because Griffin Epstein from WIUX now joins us for a rundown on where national races stand. Griffin?
Yeah, thanks, Ella. Tonight is certainly a consequential evening in American politics, with key races deciding the balance of national political power in Congress. As the guys already said, Democrats currently control both the House and Senate, but Republicans are confident they can flip both tonight, especially in a downward economy right now under Democratic President Joe Biden. And the House Democrats currently have an 8-seat advantage over the last 2 years, but some redistricting due to the 2020 census mean Republicans need just a net gain of just 6 seats tonight to seize control of the House. In reality, the question is not if the Republicans retake the House, but by how many seats do they seize control of the lower chamber. The Senate offers the most intrigue tonight. The guys already hit on some of the key races. The Democrats hold the slimmest of majorities with 50 senators apiece on both sides, but Vice President Kamala Harris holding the tie-breaking vote. Political pundits are calling the control of the Senate a toss-up, with multiple races that will come down to the wire. Most likely the balance of power in the upper chamber and most of the U.S. political scene over the next 2 years will be decided by 3 races. Let's highlight them. We'll start in Georgia. Incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock faces former football player Republican Herschel Walker. Polls have showed a near deadlock over the last month. And what could happen if neither candidate reaches 50% of the vote, this is all races in Georgia, the race would go to a runoff in December 6th. That's how Warnock was elected to the Senate in a special election just 2 years ago. Let's move to Pennsylvania. That Senate race has maybe been the most publicized race across the country this year. Republican Pat Toomey is retiring, leaving an open seat that has led to a spirited and highly contested competition between TV celebrity and doctor Mehmet Oz and Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. The Republican Oz has portrayed himself as a moderate in the general election, a little bit of a shift after the primaries when he was endorsed by Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Fetterman's campaign has been defined by his casual attitude, wearing hoodies on the campaign trail, but has also been overshadowed by his health. The Democrat had a stroke 6 months ago. Last key race to highlight that could decide things. Likely these results will be coming in very late in the night. Over on the West Coast, Catherine Cortez Masto is trying to hold off her GOP challenger, Adam Laxalt. Republicans have not won a Nevada Senate race since 2012, but former Attorney General Adam Laxalt is polling just slightly ahead of the incumbent Cortez Masto. She is a freshman incumbent, and they say those are the most vulnerable. Nevada's large Latinx population could likely decide the race. GOP is hoping to build off a trend from 2020 of more and more Latinx voters supporting Republicans. A couple other races could be interesting, including in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Ohio. All of the parties in power in those states have leads. Most of those are with incumbents, but could be competitive. And if one party has an especially good night, potentially could decide balance of power in Congress. Quite the fascinating night, guys. Looking forward to breaking down some of the more of the numbers later to you tonight.
All right, Griffin, thank you for that. There's also a slew of governorships at stake tonight. One is a rematch from 4 years ago, the Peach State of Georgia, where the incumbent Republican Governor Brian Kemp is looking to shut down the Democratic coalition behind Stacey Abrams.
And polls heading into the election day had Kemp up 6 points over Abrams. However, that race is currently characterized as too close to call.
There is also a governor's race in the state of South Carolina where incumbent Governor Henry McMaster has the early lead. That race, however, is still too early to call.
And in the state of Vermont, Republican incumbent Phil Scott has an early lead. However, that race is also too early to call.
And so it's kind of wondering where we're going to be at when we get to the rest of the night because, you know, he mentioned earlier Ohio, Pennsylvania, Georgia. If it goes to a runoff, we might not know until December, depending on how things go out in the West Coast.
Right, exactly. And I think especially with Georgia, what we saw, 2 years ago, we're not going to find out for quite some time. But besides control of Congress, potential firsts are possible tonight. Almost every election cycle, barriers are broken with some candidates who win their seats. And no state has ever elected a black woman as governor, but that could all change tonight. 3 states could possibly elect their first female black governor: Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Deirdre DeGier from Iowa, and Yolanda Flowers of Alabama. Also, Maryland and Arkansas could elect their first black governor with candidates Wes Moore and Chris Jones.
And Stacey Abrams in that race, it's a little bit not as close as it is in the Senate race, but she still is within striking distance of Governor Kemp. But besides those states, a few could potentially have their first ever female governor. Former White House press secretary under the Trump administration, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, is running in Arkansas. Her dad is also a former governor in that state, as well as Heidi Ganahl in Colorado. And in Massachusetts, if Democrat Maura Healey wins, she'll serve as the first female governor and openly gay candidate elected. Jane Swift served as acting governor previously in that state.
And over to the West Coast in Oregon, if Tina Kotek wins, she'll be the first openly lesbian governor in America. And several states could also potentially have their first black senator: Wisconsin, North Carolina, Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Arkansas, and New York. If Pennsylvania elects Mehmet Oz, he would serve as the first Muslim senator.
And Vermont could elect their first female congresswoman, Becca Balint. Arizona and Arkansas may also see their first black Congress member as one of their representatives. 8 states may elect their first Hispanic Latino Congress members. And Ella, you're doing a report on that later tonight.
Yep, that's exactly right, Ashton. I'll be discussing those candidates and the power of the Latino voters during this election cycle. Pew Research found Hispanic eligible voters are younger than eligible voters overall.
And speaking of young voters, 2 Gen Z candidates, not us of course,
No.
could win congressional seats. Lastly, 3 states could elect their Asian and Pacific Islander representatives. So overall, this midterm election could make history in more ways than one.
And that's exactly right, Ashton. And we look forward to seeing those results later on in the evening. And with those federal races out of the way we discussed earlier with Griffin, we can now get to the latest in some local races here in Bloomington. Nadia Sharf with the Indiana Daily Student is here to talk to us about them.
Nadia covers local and state politics for the IDS and joins us now in Studio 10.
Awesome. Nadia, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Before we dive into the races here in Monroe County, what should Hoosiers know considering that statewide elections more than just the Senate?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, there's more than just the Senate race. I know a lot of people, when they're going out to the polls, they are probably focusing on that one, Todd Young. But there's many other races that are out there for people to vote on.
Yeah, for sure. Looking a little bit more nationally, things that do have impact, kind of like what you guys were talking about, House races. We have races like the battle between Aaron Houchin and Matthew Fife, which is still pretty close, but it is leaning more on the side of Houchin. We have Indiana, a pretty reliably red state. And then a little bit more locally, we have, depending on the district that we're looking at, Bloomington's district, we are in District 61, IU, which is Matthew Pierce. He's running unopposed. He is pretty reliably, he is a Democrat, and he has been in the position for several years now.
Right. And jumping back to what you briefly mentioned earlier, because there's a lot to discuss here, Trey Hollingsworth's District 9 seat, which represents Bloomington and some of the surrounding area, it's opening up. So what will that race look like between the Republican candidate Aaron Houchin and Democrat Matthew Fife? I know you briefly touched on it, but if you could get a little bit more specific for our viewers.
Yes, of course. So really, if we're looking at any Indiana Republican, we're really looking at pretty consistent conservative GOP talking points. We're looking at Second Amendment support, pro-police, anti-abortion, these kind of things. The official GOP platform supports overturning Roe v. Wade, so we would likely see legislation supporting that. From a less issue-based perspective, Houchin has made it clear that reducing inflation is a very big issue for her, and I know Young as well has said that. On the other side, if we're looking at Matthew Fife, and generally, again, Indiana Democrats, we're looking at kind of the opposite. It is pretty just partisan split on some of those things, so it is pro-choice, gun safety. We do have libertarian candidates. I'm not going to lie, we don't see a lot of libertarian candidates in these roles, but that is also something to consider. These candidates are they're a lot more varied in their roles, but looking for,
Another race that's really gotten a lot of media attention is the Indiana race for Secretary of State. I know that's probably a position that typically isn't much in the news, but it's definitely become up more because of the Republican candidate.
Yeah. So actually, generally, Secretary of State races have gotten a lot more attention this year because the Secretary of State plays such a key role in election security. They have kind of the ability to make choices about where polls go, when polls close, which obviously doesn't decide these races, but can influence the people who can vote. So in Indiana, we have Republican candidate Diego Morales, who has denied the results of the 2020 election.
Right, exactly. Yes. And if we could talk a little bit more about Diego Morales, because he has had some controversy come up. I know you've done some reporting, in the past weeks on him. So could you explain to our viewers what that controversy is on Diego Morales besides denying the previous election? Yeah, so we do have a lot to go with here. In past weeks, the Indy Star has accused him of voter fraud, which I think is the biggest threat that he faces right now. Considering the position he's in. Yeah, and kind of the way that he's pitched himself. Right. He faces claims of kind of claiming a tax benefit in one county while voting in another. So this kind of double dipping that you really can't do. There's a few other things I don't want to hop over. He does face claims of sexual misconduct. He faces some allegations that he, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but his military service has been questioned a little bit, some things like that.
But do you I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but he did defeat the Republican incumbent in that primary race. Knowing all this background, do you think that will have any impact at all? I mean, Republican voters probably already had a sense of his background heading into the primary, but now that he's the candidate in the general election, do you think that's going to affect their turnout at all? It might be more of a Democratic momentum.
Well, actually, that's a very good question. So from my perspective, at least, a lot of that comes from Donald Trump's backing and support of Diego Morales over Holly Sullivan, the former incumbent who Morales defeated. But this most recent allegation of voter fraud because it is so like against what he has been kind of pushing with his campaign. I think that has set him back a lot. But we do, because of that, I think we have seen the Democratic candidate Destiny Wells come into play a little bit more here, but I mean, it's still too close to call.
Right, exactly. And I was just going to say, what would it look like if Destiny Wells did win this race?
Yeah, for sure. Let me go back into my notes. But so if Wells were to win, she would be the first Democratic Secretary of State in Indiana since 1994, and then the first statewide Democratic win since 2012. So it would be a pretty big deal. Position-wise, her issues fall pretty much in line with the Democratic Party platform, preserving election security and small d democracy, not the democratic ideas.
Let's bring it local here. I know we've been talking about some of these statewide issues, but there are a lot of other races that people in Monroe County had to vote on. I know I voted in the Monroe County election, so there's lots of other races that people had on their ballots.
So a lot of these are the district races. So like I mentioned before, Matt Pierce is IU's district representative, but we also have districts 46, 60, and 62 in addition to 61.
Right, and a big race that will impact, local voters here in Monroe County and in Bloomington is the sheriff's race,
Yes.
And what does that look like? What does that mean? I feel like a lot of people don't really know much when it comes to sheriff races because not all people see those on their ballots.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting confused here. So the sheriff that the current sheriff, Brad Swain, is term limited. So there is no incumbent, which makes this race a little bit more difficult to call. We see, and incumbents are statistically more likely to win because of their name recognition, right? So not having an incumbent always makes a race like this more worth watching. A lot of their priorities are pretty similar, looking at reducing recidivism, which is like kind of people ending up in jail again and again, aiming for better mental health, kind of for inmates, and police training. They're pretty similar in these ways. There would be a new jail built in the first term of this new sheriff's candidacy. Mm-hmm. So that's also something that we're looking at. Yeah.
Right. And I think, this sheriff race is really impactful and important for a lot of people know. I feel, especially here at IU, crime has gone up in Bloomington. I, as a student, have felt a little unsafe, throughout the semester. So it'll be really interesting to see their results and how students take what they think and take their opinions to the polls on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, there are plenty of races to dive into, but we are going to take a quick break. We're going to just catch a deep breath. We are just getting started here on election night. Polls are about to close in the state of Arkansas. We're going to get you up to date on other results after that.
That's exactly right. Stay with us. Thank you so much, Nadia, for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
and we are back with more election coverage, and we are going to start with big news. 2 races in the state of Florida have been called by the Associated Press. They have called the Florida governor's race and the Florida Senate race.
Right, exactly. And those are 2 very interesting races from what we've been seeing. We could start with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the incumbent, and he, as AP said, he has won again. And DeSantis isn't backed by Trump anymore, which is also something very interesting.
Yeah, this is, honestly, in my opinion, this is a big call. You may recall that DeSantis had a close election back in 2018 during that Democratic midterm election. So for this race to be called this early, I know polls in the state of Florida closed at 8 o'clock. We're, 20 minutes or so into the 8 o'clock hour. To already have DeSantis as the winner in that governor's race obviously says a lot to his standing in the Republican Party. I know there's going to be a lot of talk after today of not just of how we're going to move forward with, our new government in Washington, but heading down the line. I know it's 2 years away, but the 2024 race, obviously his name has been floated.
Oh, yeah. His name has definitely been floating around. There's a lot of speculation. The Republican Party, the GOP, is split. Not as many Republican members of the party are supporting Trump anymore. They're kind of having this divide. And so DeSantis isn't backed by Trump anymore. And Trump, he gave DeSantis even a new nickname. So we're seeing, is it possible that DeSantis goes up for president? It's been talked about a lot, and we won't know for a while now, but it's a possibility.
Also want to make sure that we make note there. Marco Rubio also won re-election in the Florida Senate race 2016. Presidential candidate had to drop out of that campaign, but he will be heading back to the United States Senate. He takes out Val Demings, the District 10 representative back in 2017. She's also the first female chief of police for Orlando when she was in that position. So 2 big races there in the state of Florida. Marco Rubio heading back in the Senate, and Ron DeSantis is having another term as the governor of Florida.
And it's important to also note that, Trump has been campaigning with Marco Rubio and just, where that party still aligns, because it's all about who's going to take, congressional power. So that has also been happening.
Enough of Florida. We're going to continue on here. Some other calls that have been made by the Associated Press in the state of Alabama. The chief of staff for former Senator Richard Bailey, Katie Britt, has won that race in the state of Alabama. No surprise there. Alabama, a reliably Republican state.
And also in Illinois, incumbent Democrat Tammy Duckworth won her race as well. So that's super interesting to see. She was elected in 2016, and she was previously District 8 representative, and Tammy did win her position once again.
In the state of Maryland, if we could pull up those numbers there, the state of Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, he will be heading back to the United States Senate as well, takes down the Republican Chris Chafee.
And moving more towards the Northeast in Connecticut, Democrat Richard Blumenthal has also won his position over in Connecticut, and he was the senator. He's been the senator there since 2011. He is also the former Connecticut Attorney General and state senator. So he's got a lot of experience under his belt. And I believe we are still, just getting in so many results and trying to give you the latest updates in polling that are being sent our way. And we are going to also later discuss, what's going on in Kentucky as well, because those results should be coming in shortly.
And we also want to keep you up. There are also some races that are still too early to call. We've been talking all night about Georgia and Ohio. Both of those are currently too early to call. Tim Ryan does have the early lead, although 22% of the vote, only 22% of the vote is in the state of Ohio. And in Georgia, Raphael Warnock has an early lead in that race, but only 30%. About 30% of the vote is in there.
Right, and we mentioned, Georgia earlier in the night, and how it's just going to be a while before we know what's going on in Georgia. That happened 2 years ago. It's happening again now. There was today, a court in Georgia did say that they're not going to start. They'll wait till November 14th to accept those mail-in ballots, because some people in Cobb County never received their mail-in ballots. And so that will definitely bump those results back.
Don't mean to overstep you there, but in the state of Indiana, I wonder if we can get that graphic pulled up. The Associated Press has also called Todd Young will be heading back to the United States Senate. I know there were some college student organizations that were hopeful that they could get a flip in this state, some Democratic momentum in the state, but he will be heading back to the United States Senate, Todd Young, for Indiana.
Also, real quick to mention, Kentucky has been called for Rand Paul. Rand Paul will be returning to Senate in his position there as he is the incumbent.
Well, we still have a lot more. I know we have been talking about a lot of races. Let's get another quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined with another writer for the IDS. So please stay with us. You're watching IUSTV's Election Night coverage.
All right, welcome back to our live election coverage. We are here in Studio 10 in Franklin Hall, and we are doing as much coverage on this election as we can, partnering with IDS and WIUX. And right now, we want to focus more here on Monroe County voters and what's on their ballot, and that's the school board seats.
Yeah, IDS reporter Emma Uber has been covering the Monroe County Community School Corporation since early September and is here to break it all down for us. So, what do you got for us, Emma?
Thanks, guys. As controversy has arisen nationwide over critical race theory, school safety, and book banning, school board meetings have frequently made headlines, and Indiana is no exception to the national trend. With school board meetings across the state heating up, Monroe County contains two school corporations, Monroe County Community School Corporation and Richland Bean Blossom Community School Corporation. Both of the two Monroe County district school boards have multiple seats up for election today. Monroe County voters were also faced with an additional question on their ballots today, as MCCSC seeks a referendum to bolster funding. School boards heavily influence how school corporations function, from approving renovations to selecting a superintendent. The MCCSD School Board's recent decision to alter district start and end times exemplifies how school board decisions can impact families' daily lives. School board members serve 4-year terms. However, not all terms run on the same schedule, meaning only a portion of school board seats are up for election at the same time.
So Emma, why do these school board elections matter? Why should people be voicing their opinion in these elections?
School board seats matter because it's the way that community members can make their voice heard and hold school administration accountable. Obviously, community members don't necessarily vote on superintendents. However, it is the school board that hires the superintendent. So it's the one way that people can have a say in how their money is spent in school boards, especially because public school boards are the ones that approve the budgets, and public school budgets come from taxpayer funding. School boards are actually really important because they're determining how taxpayer dollars are going towards local children's education.
Right, and I know you repeated a lot of your information that you've been reporting on since September, but could you just repeat for our viewers, which districts have seats up for this in the school board?
Yeah, so for the Monroe County Community School Corporation, there are 3 seats up for election. There's District 1, which has 3 candidates running for election, none of which are incumbent. There's District 3, which also has 3 candidates running for the election, none of which are incumbent. And District 7, which Brandon Schur, the current MCCSC school board president, is running unopposed in that election, and he is an incumbent, obviously, as he currently serves as president.
So what are some of the topics that are being discussed in regards to the school board in terms of people choosing who they want to vote for?
Yeah, I definitely think one of the biggest topics being debated in the MCCSC school board race is school safety. It's been super controversial and has really dominated the public comment portion of a lot of school board meetings this year. The school board voted to disarm student resource officers in May of 2021, so about a year and a half ago now. However, since that happened, there have been 3 instances of weapons found in MCCSC schools. In one instance, a bachelor middle school student took a loaded weapon onto a school bus this year. All of them have ended without incident, but a lot of parents have expressed concerns at school board meetings about the school safety, and that is something that we've seen exemplified. Tabitha Crouch, in particular, is running for school board, and her entire campaign is based off the fact that she wants to know that her 2 children who are MCCSC students are safe.
Right, exactly. And, speaking on this referendum, I feel like a lot of people, that are voting in Monroe County don't exactly know what that referendum is and how much that could impact, residents here. So could you explain that a little bit more for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the referendum is basically taking a portion of property tax dollars that residents pay and putting it towards school board funding. In this case, MCCSC is asking for 18.5 cents out of every $100 of assessed property value in property tax. So for every $100 that a Monroe County resident would pay in property taxes, 18.5 additional cents would be charged, and that would go towards school funding. That really only amounts to about $10.40 per month for the average Monroe County family, so a total of just over $100 every year. However, this will make a big difference for MCCSC. MCCSC is no stranger to referendum funding. There was one that was passed in 2016, and the reason they're asking again is that that levy of money that was raised from the 2016 referendum is set to expire this year, and MCCSC says that if a referendum is not renewed, then they would run out of that money in 2 years and essentially be operating on a deficit and unable to pay their teachers a competitive wage.
Oh, wow. Emma, thank you so much for your reporting on that. I feel like it's definitely not widespread knowledge, here in Monroe County, so we really appreciate all your reporting and work on that. And, as we get those results, we will let you guys know, and you guys all there, we will let you know. Thank you so much for joining us, and we are going to head it over to a break, but make sure to stay with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Welcome back to IUSTV's election night coverage. I'm Anna Black.
And I'm Brooklyn Lambright. Several races have been called since we last updated you.
That's right, Brooklyn. But so far, we have seen a lot of Senate races coming in. In Arkansas, we have Republican John Boozman. He is the projected winner from AP. And then next, we move to Oklahoma. Now, in this race, it was unique. Both Republican seats were up for grabs, and it is projected that both Republicans filled those seats tonight. Those Republicans were James Lankford and Mark Wayne Mullen.
Yeah, in South Carolina, we see that Republican Tim Scott is the projected winner. And going over to Maryland, we see that Chris Van Hollen is the projected winner.
And now to Vermont, the projected winner is Peter Welch. And the governor for Tennessee, incumbent Republican Bill Lee. We'll give a second here for, there we go. As you can see, Tennessee, the projected winner for their governor is Bill Lee. Again, he is just refilling that spot. All right, well, Ashton, a lot of stuff came in all at once. We're seeing a lot of projected Senate seats that have been filled and some governor seats as well. What can you tell us about what we just learned and what AP has just projected as these winners from what we listed off?
Yeah, nothing surprising to me quite yet. I'm still, it's really going to come down to a few. I want to run you guys through a scenario here. We're talking about Senate majority. It's really going to come down to a lot of key races. The Associated Press has been calling races all night long. We just heard from Oklahoma, South Carolina, you name it. But it's really going to come down to just a few. I want to start Wisconsin. I'm going to put that in the Republican column. There's been a lot of Democratic hope that state could potentially go Democratic, but polling just doesn't seem like it's going to be enough. There's been a last-minute push for that state, kind of out of reach in my eyes. Another one, let me update this map here. Actually, Florida, we talked about that earlier. That went to Marco Rubio. North Carolina, Ted Budd is running to fill that seat that is a Republican open seat. And that leaves us down to these few states: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. We've had Griffin come on earlier to talk about those seats here. But already notice Republicans are at 48, Democrats are at 47. The magic number is 51. However, Democrats can get to 50 and have majority. That's what we've been at since President Biden took office. So 47 for Democrats, 48 for Republicans. I'm going to put Ohio in the Republican column. J.D. Vance. I know Tim Ryan in that state, the Democrat, has been hopeful of that one. It's a current Republican seat, so Democrats can afford to lose that one. So I'm going to keep that in the Republican column. I'm also going to keep, actually, we're going to move out west real quick. I'm kind of jumping around here. Sorry to throw you guys off here. Out in Nevada, this seems like Republicans' best chance to flip a seat. If they're going to get to a Senate majority, it's going to be through the state of Nevada. Catherine Cortez Masto, she has not polled well in that state, really struggling with the Latinx voters when it comes to crime and when it comes to the economy. So that's one that Republicans are really feeling confident about. They're already to 50, so that leaves Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. They can't lose any of those if they want to have control of the Senate. Pennsylvania is already a Republican seat. An outgoing Republican, so Mehmet Oz, the Republican there, if he wins that and Catherine Cortez Masto out in Nevada loses her seat, Republicans get to that Senate majority even without winning Arizona or Georgia. So a good night for Republicans would be to flip all those states while also holding it. That would get them to 53. However, Democrats, they've been confident in their chances. Let me reset some things here. They can lose Nevada. Let's say they lose Nevada. The poll numbers there probably are suggesting that. Mark Kelly would have to remain in Arizona. He's up, last time I read, just a few percentage points in the polls in Arizona. Georgia, I'm going to leave that one. Here's my most likely scenario. Let's say Fetterman wins in Pennsylvania. Let's say by tomorrow, depending on how long these results take to come in, we know that Kelly wins in Arizona. Nevada goes to the Republicans. This is what we could be looking at. Because Georgia, we mentioned it earlier, there's a runoff in Georgia if no candidate gets to 50%. So we could be here for a week, 2 weeks. We could probably even into December when that runoff is. and we might not know who actually controls the Senate. But it's going to come down to Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, in my opinions.
Great, thank you so much, Ashton. We'll definitely be keeping a look on those states tonight. Well, we have talked so much about the importance of voting, and there is one way that Monroe County made the whole process easier for Hoosiers during this election cycle.
That's right, Anna. Bloomington organizations are partnering with Uber this midterm election to offer free rides to the polls. The National Organization for Women Foundation, or NOW, granted its Monroe County chapter funds to make voting more accessible. With the help of local organizations, student groups, government officials, and Uber reps, voters can get a free round-trip Uber ride to their polling site. President of Monroe County Now says transportation and connection to local issues are main barriers with student voters. She says it's an important election with high-stake races and hopes to put it on students' radars. Competitive House races today include Secretary of State race between Destiny Wells and Diego Morale, House District 62 race, and Bloomington's sheriff race. With the Uber app, you can claim a free voucher by scanning the QR code or by visiting the website iu.bloomvotes.com. The site also has info on other races and candidates.
All right, we're coming up on the 9 p.m. hour where 15 states are about to close their polls. This includes states with key races like Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin. You're watching IUSTV's live election night coverage. We will be right back.
No Senate's calls since 8:30 in the U.S.
Welcome back. We are at the top of the hour at 9, and we're seeing a lot of results continue to come in.
Yeah, it's going to be a close race, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, according to CNN, over 41 million people have already voted, and that's either in person or voting by mail. Each state has different laws concerning early in-person voting or voting by mail. Most states require a registered voter apply for a mail-in ballot, but in states like California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and Utah, there's an all-vote-by-mail law. This means these registered voters automatically receive a mail-in ballot. However, states that require an individual to apply for a mail-in ballot may also need to get a notoriety signature on their ballot. This occurs for states like Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, and South Dakota. A few other states just require a witness signature, such as Alabama, Alaska, Kentucky, Louisiana, Minnesota, North Carolina, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Virginia, and Wisconsin. Some states, like here in Indiana, require mail-in ballots to be received no later than 6 p.m. on Election Day, compared to Cobb County in Georgia, where voters have until November 14th to send in their mail-in ballots after some voters there never received their ballot after requesting them. Almost every state has an online mail-in ballot tracker except for Illinois, Mississippi, Missouri, and Wyoming.
Mail-in ballots have quickly become a very popular way to vote for those who are unable to make it out to those polls for whatever reason. Our IUSTV reporter Callie Lichter shows us just how these absentee ballots actually work.
Like a lot of IU students, I'm from out of state, which means that it isn't very feasible for me to go home and vote in this year's midterms. But I still wanted to be civically engaged. So that's why I requested a vote by mail ballot. Voting by mail is a perfect option for students who still want to be engaged but cannot go home to vote. Now, a lot of absentee voter ballots or vote by mail ballots are very similar, if not the same. So let's go through my absentee voter ballot and see what I received. I received all my absentee voting materials in this envelope, and in this envelope I got a return envelope that requires no postage, an instruction page telling me in detail how to fill out my voter ballot and how to return it as well. I also received instructions on where I can drop off my ballot if I was at home, so this isn't really of any use to me right now, but it's okay. And then I also received my official ballot. Now, to fill out your ballot, all you need is a pencil or a pen, and then of course your ballot. And I'm going to fill mine in off screen because in the majority of states, you are not allowed to post a selfie or any type of media with a filled in ballot. So let me do that real quick. Now that I have my ballot all filled out and sealed in this envelope, it is time to go deliver it. So all I need to do is find a blue post office box, slip my ballot in, and it's good to go. Whoa, wasn't that simple? So don't let the fact that you're from out of state and can't go home to vote prohibit you from voting in this year's midterms. To find out where you can get an absentee voter ballot, just Google your state name plus absentee voter ballot or your state name plus vote by mail ballot.
Now, there have been no Senate calls since 8:30, but at 8 p.m. AP did call Maryland Senate race for Democratic candidate Chris Van Hollen. As for U.S. House, Georgia House District 14, Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene.
That's right, in Texas House District 3, Republican Keith Self is the projected winner. And in North Carolina, House District 8 Republican Dan Bishop is now being called as the projected winner.
And for Tennessee, the U.S. House District 3 Republican Chuck Fleischmann is projected by AP to be that winner. And just kind of recapping some previous races that have already come in with the Senate race is Arkansas. It was projected Republican John Boozman won that.
Yeah, in Oklahoma, both Republican seats won. That's with James Lankford and Mark Wayne Mullen.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to see that both Republicans filled both those seats that were up for grabs. And in South Carolina, AP projected Republican Tim Scott to be that winner. And then bringing it over to Maryland, AP also projected Chris Van Hollen to win that.
Over in Vermont, Peter Welch is the projected winner, and the governor for Tennessee, incumbent Republican Bill Lee, is the projected winner.
All right, we're going to take a break right now and come back, and we'll have the latest updates. Stay with us. Welcome back. We kicked off the top of the 9 o'clock hour with 15 states closing their polls.
That's right. States such as Arizona, Kansas, Nebraska, and Texas are all closing their polls right now.
It's going to be very telling hour as these are some very close races and very close calls. Texas is one that we are definitely going to need to keep an eye out for this evening. Governor candidates Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke are only about 6% away in the poll counts, with Abbott ahead. That's pretty close for Texas, given the history of how they usually vote. As for governor updates, we have Republican Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is projected for Arkansas.
Yeah, in the state, the 2 lieutenant governor candidates are both women. That's making history, really. There's never been that ever before. And that's Leslie Rutledge and Kelly Kraut making history for the state.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy to see in Arkansas, the first, if it comes out to be how it's projected, the first female governor, and then her lieutenant too, first female. I mean, that would be a female powerhouse.
It would be, yeah.
Really record-breaking.
Yeah. Over in Rhode Island, Daniel McKee is the projected winner. And over in Wyoming, Mark Gordon is now the projected winner.
And in Iowa, Kim Reynolds, who is a Republican, is the projected winner. And if we bring it over to Ohio, Mike DeWine, who is a Republican, is also that projected winner.
Yeah, following this Republican streak in South Carolina, Henry McMaster is the projected winner.
All right, now for some House updates and some House results. West Virginia District 2 Republican Alexander Mooney is who AP has just projected. And if we bring it over to West Virginia House District 1, Republican Carol Miller is that projected winner.
Virginia's District 5 Republican Robert Good has now been projected as the winner, and Virginia's District 4 Democrat Donald McEachin.
And in Virginia, we're switching it from Democrat to Republican with the District 1 projected winner, Rob Whitman. As for Ohio, for District 5, Republican Bob Latta is that projected winner.
Over in Tennessee, House District 6 Republican John Rose has now been called as the projected winner. And in Texas, House District Republican John Carter has now been called.
Now we're keeping that Republican streak too. In Indiana, District 4, Jim Baird has been called for this district, and he is Republican. And again, another predominantly Republican state, Texas, that District 6 winner was projected to be Republican Jake Ellzey.
Over in Texas's District 11, Republican August Pfluger has been called. And Texas District 25, Roger Williams has now been called as well.
And if we bring it down to Louisiana, District 4 Republican Mike Johnson is the projected winner there. And now let's bring it up to the East Coast. New York District 13 Democrat Adriano Espala is that projected winner according to AP. And then if we go over to the Midwest in Oklahoma, District 2 Republican Josh Breachin is that projected winner.
In Kentucky, District 2 Republican Brett Guthrie has been called as the projected winner, and over in Ohio, District 4 Republican Jim Jordan. Also in Kentucky, District 4 Republican Thomas Massey has been called as well.
All right, we're staying in the southern states. Georgia District 3 Republican Drew Ferguson has been projected as that winner for the district. Again, staying in the South, South Carolina District 2 Republican Joe Wilson was that projected winner. All right, now we're going to move back up to the Midwest with Ohio. The District 3 Democrat Joyce Beatty has been projected as the winner there.
Over back in Texas, we have a Democrat winning this time in District 33 with Mark Cece. And in Florida, District 9, Democrat Darren Soto.
Yeah, it's interesting to see both of those predominantly Republican states call some Democrats too in those House of Reps.
It seems like we're seeing a lot of Republicans being called so far, and I don't know if that's because the state is closing polls earlier in those predominantly Republican states, and the predominantly Democrat states are staying open a little bit longer, and maybe that's why we're seeing this flood of Republican winners right now.
Absolutely. Well, back in Texas, House District 20 seat Republican Michael Burgess has been that projected winner. And going back to down to South Carolina, District 5, Ralph Norman has been projected to win there.
Over in Georgia, District 14 Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene has been called as the projected winner. And speaking of young voters, IU participated in the Big Ten Voting Challenge again this year to boost voter turnout among students. The Big Ten Voting Challenge is a competition involving 14 college campuses in the Big Ten Conference for students engaging in local elections. There are 2 awards, one for the greatest overall turnout and one for the greatest increase in voting rates. The Political and Civic Engagement Program, or PACE, helps facilitate the competition here at IU. Associate Director Mark Fraley says it's incredibly important to get students involved in voting so that they have a say in important community issues.
These might be things that impact small things like roads or construction projects. They might be things that carry much bigger issues like civil rights. But all of these matter in terms of creating a society where we belong and we know that we can function in.
Fraley said he hopes this challenge encouraged students to vote both in Bloomington and in their hometowns and got students thinking about the issues in their communities that they want to see solved.
We can expect the issue of abortion rights and restrictions to have an impact on how Hoosiers are voting this year. I know that was definitely a huge issue for students, as well as like the economy and gas prices. Those are a lot of things that I've been hearing. But our IUSTV reporter Chloe Ferguson is breaking down Indiana elections for IU students and faculty and kind of seeing what swaying them in this midterm election. Let's take a look.
According to the U.S. Census, only 50% of people ages 18 to 24 voted in the 2020 presidential election. IU professor Don Lyon is using his access to college-age students to encourage voting among them.
They have ideas, they have things that they want to accomplish, and they need to have a direct impact on who is going to provide that leadership at a state, local, and national level.
A lot of college students, this is their first time being on their own, so I think the student debt crisis, health care, federal wage, and anything really relating to money, the market, and so on is important because it's our first time dealing with these issues.
This year, there are many candidates running for local, state, and federal office. Some major topics regarding the midterm elections include whether or not climate change is a threat to the stability of our country, regulations related to the possession of firearms, abortion rights, race, and immigration. Indiana U.S. senators play a key role when it comes to how these issues impact the constituents.
That individual is not representing us only on a state level, but on a federal level.
But why is this representation so important?
They are in charge of representing us as Hoosiers for bills, amendments, and basically anything we want to be changed. That is who is in charge for the next 6 years.
For Monroe County Commissioner, Democrat Lee Jones is running for re-election against Republican Perry Robinson. In the state of Indiana, Democratic candidate Thomas M. McDermott Jr., who is the current mayor of Hammond, Indiana, is running against our current senator, Republican Todd Young. These positions will impact the lives of Hoosiers of all ages, which is why Professor Lyon feels young people should get out and vote.
They will be able to help decide the path this country is going to take.
And why Chloe Johnson is so passionate about this election.
It shows what we believe in and lets us fight for what we believe is right.
Once the votes are counted and casted, college students often wonder where they will see the impact of exercising their rights.
The local government voting has a huge impact because we see these firsthand.
For college students, this might be the first time they see their opinions impacting the world around them.
They have ideas on what they want done. They need to voice that opinion, and the way to do that is through voting.
Midterm election results will not be finalized until November 9th. With Hoosier News Source, I'm Chloe Ferguson.
All right, our reporter Ella Rhodes actually had the chance to sit down with some IU students to discuss their take on voting and kind of where their heads at during this midterm election.
I'm here at the Monroe County Election Center where IU students just went inside to go vote as it is the first day of early voting. IU students spoke here at the Election Center about how important it is for them to vote.
Yeah, I believe it's very important for students to come out to vote, to kind of get an opportunity to exercise their rights and, fight for the things that we see that we want to bring change to.
In the past, people haven't been able to vote. And, you know, many people who came before us fought very vigorously to be able to get all groups of people to vote.
If we want change, we have to be the part to take it. As it is our legal right to go out and vote, and I feel like our voices can be heard.
In 2020, more than 2/3 of IU Bloomington students voted in the general election. This was a massive increase than in previous years. It was a 22% jump from 2016. And the last day to vote is November 8th. Make sure you look into your local polling center's hours of operations so you know when you can vote.
All right, now joining us in studio is IDS reporter Haley Ryan to discuss youth voter turnout. Haley?
Thanks, guys. In the past 2 elections, youth engagement set records, according to the Washington Post. In 2020, 54% of younger voters, those between the ages of 18 and 29, cast ballots, a 9% increase from previous presidential election years. In 2018, 36% of young voters participated in the midterms, an 11% increase from the previous midterms. These trends were expected to continue this year, according to the Post, and the Pew Research Center found that 51% of voters aged 18 to 29 said they were extremely or very motivated to vote. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much for bringing us those great stats on young voters. And coming up after the break, the latest polling updates. Make sure to stay with us. Welcome back to the IUSTV election special. I'm Chloe Ferguson.
And I'm Carly Rasmussen. Before we give you a bunch of updates from all the poll closures at the 9 o'clock hour, we're going to pass it over to our streaming partner, WIUX, for their update.
Here in the WIUX studio. We're all here talking the election, and we're actually going to be giving a governor update. That's going to be coming from Carl. So
in Massachusetts, Democrat-elect Maura Healey becomes the nation's first openly lesbian governor-elect and the first woman to be elected governor of Massachusetts. She beats out Jeff Deal, flipping the governorship back to the Democrats. So also in Florida, Ron DeSantis has been given a second term up against Charlie Crist.
And that's what we've got. I think it's really important that we are electing people like the new governor of Massachusetts. We talked about this in our last break, how important it is to just see more representation in our democracy when we were talking about young people becoming members of the House. It's also important to see that at the state level as well.
Another quick update with Florida and the Senate. 88% of the votes are in, and it has been given to the incumbent Republican Rubio has won the re-election for the Senate. He has 57.6% of the votes, and Demings has only 41.3%. So Rubio has won the re-election for the Senate in Florida.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isabella. And one other update, in one of our previous updates, we talked about how the GOP in Arizona wanted to file a lawsuit about polling times, and Paige has an update on that.
Yes, so the Republicans filed an emergency request in Maricopa County to extend voting hours after the county experienced tabulation issues at about 20% of polling locations. That request was just denied by County Superior Court Judge Timothy Ryan, who has been a judge in that county since 2005. I think this is really significant because it really upholds the integrity of our elections, and I think it's important that we not allow rule changes whenever we feel like it in elections. And I'm just really happy about that decision overall.
Yes. And that's all that we've got here. We'll toss it back to you guys in the studio.
Yeah. Welcome back. Thank you, WIUX, for your coverage updates for the following poll closures in 15 states at 9 p.m. Now to the U.S. House. In Georgia, Lucy McBath for the Democratic Party is the projected winner. In the Midwest, Ohio Republican Party candidate Bill Johnson is the projected winner. And down in Virginia, Gerald Connolly is the Democratic projected winner. Down in North Carolina, Virginia Fox is the projected winner for the Republican Party. And back in the Midwest, Republican candidate Brad Winstrup is the projected winner.
That's right, Chloe. And moving down south, we got South Carolina, Russell Fry, another Republican. And further down south, we got Texas, Joaquin Castro, a Democrat. Georgia, Hank Johnson, a Democrat. New York, Gerald Nadler, also a Democrat. And Oklahoma, we got Frank Lucas, Republican. And right here in our home state, Indiana, we have Rudy Yakim, another Republican.
Yes, it's very interesting seeing all those Democrats win for those very Republican states. If we go up to New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the projected winner for the Democratic Party. And still in New Jersey, Frank Pallone is the Democratic candidate, is also the projected winner. In the Midwest, David Joyce is the Republican projected winner. Down in Alabama, David Joyce is also the Republican winner. Up in New Jersey, Rovery Menendez is the Democratic candidate who won. And down in Georgia, Buddy Carter is the Republican projected winner.
All right, moving over to our other house in Congress, we have the Senate. So all of these projected winners for the 9 o'clock hour are all incumbents, actually, that we're going to share here. So New York, we have Charles Schumer, a Democrat. North Dakota, John Heaven, a Republican. South Dakota, John Thune, another Republican. Kansas, Jerry Morgan, Republican. Arkansas, John Boozman, Republican. And Indiana, we got Todd Young, yet again, another Republican. So as of right now, the Senate is currently projected as 39 seats for Democrats and 40 seats for Republican. Now, we want to focus on a group of voters who have significantly grown in size since the last midterms. Our own reporter, Ella Rhodes, is here with us.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, guys, so much. So I want to talk a little bit about Latino voters making up a large portion of those who can vote in this midterm election, around 14.3%. And according to Pew Research, the eligible Hispanic voter population could exceed 34.5 million this election season, which is around 5 million higher from the last midterms in 2018. And in California and Texas, over 32% of eligible voters are Hispanic. And continuing with those stats, Pew Research says that 44% of eligible voters in New Mexico are Hispanic. They also found that in New Mexico, it's the only state where Latinos, quote, make up a higher share of the total eligible voter population than any other racial or ethnic group. And, you know, guys, it's also important to note that this specific demographic doesn't typically trend to vote for a certain party, you know, one way or another. In a recent Telemundo study, 72% of Cuban Americans said they favor Republican Ron DeSantis over Democratic candidate Charlie Crist, in which we heard the results for that election earlier this evening. And back in 2020, Miami-Dade County heavily voted red as Trump only lost by 7 points, and Miami-Dade County in previous elections is known for going more blue. Telemundo also mentioned that Floridian Puerto Ricans tend to vote more Democratic. Latino voters don't just play a big role this year in voting. 37 Hispanic women are candidates up for election in the U.S. House, which hasn't been seen before. 6 states could also have their first Hispanic Congress member represent their state in the House or Senate. And that's in Georgia Democrat Antonio Das Fernandez, Georgia Republican Cesar Gonzalez, Maryland Republican Yerzy Morgan, Nebraska Democrat Tony Vargas, Oregon Republican Lori Chavez DeMerimer, Oregon Democrat Andrea Salinas, Pennsylvania Democrat Shamin Daniels, and Virginia Republican Yesli Vega.
So Ella, thank you so much for that update and all that coverage. Just our first question for you here on this panel. We're now joined by Ella Rhodes here and also Ashton Hackman, another IUSTV reporter. So Ella, how many of the 37 Hispanic women candidates are running on Democratic tickets and how many are Republican?
Right, so around 20 Democrats and 13 Republicans are on the tickets this year. So it's represented by both parties pretty fairly. Like I was mentioning earlier, how this demographic doesn't just go one way or the other. It's pretty split up.
So what exactly does it mean if these candidates do win their seats?
Yeah, so if some of the Latino candidates win their seats, many states will have their first Latino congressional members like Georgia and Maryland, Nebraska, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Virginia.
Mm-hmm. So Ashton, I know you've been kind of keeping up with some exit polling data, maybe just a little bit. Have you heard anything about this demographic at all?
Yeah, but I'm also, one thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking of, you know, such a seismic shift would be in Florida. Ron DeSantis, some of the numbers out of southern Florida, specifically Miami-Dade County, if I could actually get my map to work here for a second, there's just been a shift from when he was elected in 2018. So something resonates with Latino voters specifically, maybe not just specific Latin Americans, but Cubans in Florida is also one that is a changing demographic that Republicans seem to be doing very well with.
Right, exactly. You know, I had mentioned that earlier, and the Pew Research study that I had also mentioned goes very in depth into it, more specifically talking about all these states and, you know, the percentage majority of the demographics of Hispanic and Latino voters. And like Ashton had mentioned, you know, it's so interesting that a majority of the Cuban Americans in Florida are going Republican, and, you know, then the Puerto Rican Floridians are going more Democratic. And you know, you see that in Miami-Dade County. You know, I don't think anyone really knew that Miami-Dade County, that election in 2020 was going to be so close there. You know, 7 percentage points for Trump. So it's really interesting to see this demographic, and also this demographic is very young. You know, it's also growing. This is a huge portion of voters coming into the election, and it could really change a lot of things. And you also have to see, you know, it's not just Florida that's experienced this. You have to look at other states like Nevada and Texas and California as well.
So why, if you could make any predictions or have any guesses, why do you think there has been such a shift and now there is such a difference within these two groups?
It could be based, I mean, when it comes to national issues, I know Democrats throughout this race has really tried to make it on, non-economic issues, abortion, gun safety, whereas Republicans have really been honing in on this message about the economy, like we need to tackle inflation. So in some of those election or exit polling numbers, issues with the economy came up, as ranked among some of the more important issues when it came to Latino voters. So when it comes to Florida, that obviously helps there, but then also in Nevada later, Catherine Cortez Masto, she's in an uphill battle to win re-election in a competitive state, and it's going to come down to that Latino electorate because of, their importance on economic issues.
Exactly, and you also have to think about Texas as well. According to the New York Times, in the Texas Rio Grande Valley House races there, a lot of Republicans are confident that this district is going to flip. The races between Monica de la Cruz, a Republican candidate, and Michelle Vallejo, the Democratic candidate. So they are confident in that, and it's really seeing like where the GOP can flip these seats. Texas House District 28 is 78.2% Hispanic, and those two candidates there are Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, and Casey Garcia, a Republican. In previous years, Biden won this district by 7 points back in 2020. But like we were saying, Republicans are confident they can flip some of these seats. And then there's another important race in this in Texas as well, involving a large Latino population, around 83% in House District 34 of Texas as well. And that's Representative Maya Flores, a Republican, against Vicente Gonzalez, a Democrat. And Maya Flores is the incumbent congresswoman, and that was after winning a special election as well. So it's really interesting to see what's going to happen in Texas. I know a lot of these results still haven't come in yet. We're patiently waiting to see what happens, but it's really interesting as this growing demographic is having a lot of influence in these elections.
Ashton, you mentioned just how even within these two groups alone, issues such as the economy and then comparative to issues such as an abortion they're polarizing these two different groups, and I think we don't see that only within the Latino community. We see that across the entire country, and that's what these two parties are. It's basically economy versus abortion at this point. I mean, those are coming in at these main issues, and it's really going to come down to those two.
Yeah, and that's why this election feels so different. I mean, if you look back to 2018, that was a referendum on President Trump. Democrats were motivated to get out to the polls, and they did so. This election, it's kind of hard. It's basically just going to be a competition on who's more motivated. Republicans who want to get control again of Congress, or is it Democrats who say, look, there's more important issues than just the economy. But when consistent numbers show that the economy is a big, important factor for the way people vote, it's going to come down to a state-by-state basis.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. It's about motivation. Like, this is a midterm election that's extremely anticipated because we haven't seen something like this in our country before, So a lot of people are thinking, well, for me, it comes down to the economy. Well, for me, it comes down to abortion. Depends on where you're aligned and what your priorities are, but it's who's motivated to get to that ballot box and put in their vote. And, we're just not going to know the results of that for a few weeks, possibly. So it's really interesting to see that. And it's also, those two things are so important in getting voters to vote, because a lot of Democrats have been campaigning on Roe v. Wade right now, and they are saying that this is our main priority, and they're going off of that in their campaign speeches and all that. So it's interesting to see, what Republicans or what independents will go vote for a Democrat in this midterm election, because that is possibly where their priorities could be. Then again, there's people who have other priorities like inflation, economy, and crime.
Not to step over you, but if you take a look at, I know we have some of those poll numbers here, many of these races have tightened. As we had, just a few days ago, we were talking about Fetterman in Pennsylvania or Warnock in Georgia. Those races were still very close, but they had a bit of breathing room. Now they're razor thin. It really depends on, if this election were to happen at specific times throughout this year, really,
Right.
we would have had such different results based on
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
seriously just an issue driven rather than a referendum, which is typically what midterms
Right,
are.
and I want to bring up your point of motivation again, because that's what we're going to see. And you mentioned Fetterman and Oz. Pennsylvania has only received 28% of their votes right now that they're counting. So we've got a long way to go in Pennsylvania because it is one of those states that could really flip everything that's going on in the country concerning Congress.
You know what? I mean, this was just an incredible discussion. I think we have a long night ahead of us. We have long weeks ahead of us and long days. But Ella and Ashton, thank you so much for joining Chloe and I. Thanks for, the update and getting back with us on the desk. The latest polling updates will be with us soon. Stay with us.
All right, welcome back to our live IUSTV News election special with a bunch of midterm updates we're going to get to, and right after that, we'll have an IDS reporter joining us soon. But let's talk those updates.
Yes, lots of them.
So starting with Senate in New York, Charles Schumer, the incumbent Democrat, won his seat. Going on into North Dakota, John Hoeven, Republican, also an incumbent, won his seat as well. And moving on into South Dakota, its next door neighbor, John Thune, Republican, also won his seat. And staying in that region in the Midwest, we have Kansas, Jerry Morgan, Republican, also won his seat and is an incumbent. Arkansas, John Boozman, a Republican and incumbent, won his seat. And here in the home state that we are in as of right now, Indiana, Todd Young also won his seat, and he's the incumbent Republican candidate as well. And the Senate is still currently projected as 39 seats for Democrats and 40 seats for Republicans. Again, 51 is needed for control.
That's right, Ella. Moving on to some governor races that have also been projected and called. In Ohio, we have Governor Mark DeWine, the Republican incumbent. Iowa, Kim Reynolds, another Republican incumbent. Wyoming, Mark Gordon, Republican incumbent. Rhode Island, Daniel McKee, Democratic incumbent. Little switch up. South Carolina, we got Henry McMaster, Republican incumbent. New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, Republican incumbent. And Vermont, Phil Scott, you guessed it, Republican incumbent.
And moving on to those House updates, starting in Alabama, Gary Palmer, Republican, and Mike Rogers, Republican, both won their seats. Moving into South Dakota, Dusty Johnson, a Republican, also won his. Back in Alabama, we have Jerry Carl, Republican, he won his seat. Moving more into the Northeast, we have New York with Nicole Malliotakis, a Republican, winning her seat. And Texas, a big place of elections tonight. We see Greg Casar, who won his seat, a Democrat. Also in Texas, Ronnie Jackson, a Republican, won his seat. And in a last House update, New Jersey, Bill Pascrell won his Democratic seat.
So many updates from that 9 o'clock hour. We had 15 poll closures across the country, so got a lot to catch up on.
For sure.
We're now going to pass it over to IDS reporter Haley Ryan for some insight on abortion and how this is going to play into this year's midterm election. Haley.
Thanks, guys. This past summer, the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned Roe versus Wade, holding that the Constitution does not grant the right to an abortion and returned regulation power to the states. Now, abortion is on the ballot. In Kentucky, voters will decide if they support Amendment 2, which would amend the Commonwealth's Constitution so that it couldn't be interpreted to secure or protect a right to abortion or require the funding of abortion. In Montana, voters will decide whether or not to adopt the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, according to NPR. This act would impose criminal penalties on healthcare providers who did not act to preserve the life of infants who were born alive, including those born during an attempted abortion. A born alive infant is any infant who can breathe, has a heartbeat, or has a definite voluntary muscle movement after birth. Healthcare providers who fail to take necessary action could face up to $50,000 in fines or up to 20 years in prison, or both. In California, Proposition 1 would amend the state's constitution so that it would include an individual's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the right to choose to have an abortion and the right to choose whether or not to use contraceptives. The amendment wouldn't limit existing rights to privacy and equal protection under the state's constitution and would have no direct fiscal impact. Michigan voters will have the opportunity to vote on Proposal 22-3, or the Reproductive Freedom for All petition. This proposal would amend the state's constitution to give every person the right to reproductive freedom. This freedom includes the right to make pregnancy-related decisions like prenatal care or abortion. If passed, Michigan would be unable to discriminate in enforcing the right to reproductive freedom and could only deny or infringe on this right if the state was advancing a compelling interest in the health of the person seeking care. The state could regulate abortion after the fetus is viable, but could not prohibit an abortion intended to protect the life, physical health, or mental health of the pregnant person. The state would also be unable to prosecute or penalize an individual on the outcome, both perceived and actual, of their pregnancy and an individual who helped a pregnant person exercise their right to reproductive freedom. In Vermont, voters will decide whether or not to add an amendment to their state constitution that states that a person's right to personal reproductive autonomy is central to the liberty and dignity to control one's life. The amendment would prohibit the state from infringing on this right without a compelling interest, according to a poll from the University of New Hampshire. Abortion is a top 2 issue for 20% of registered voters, 32% of Democrats, 17% of independents, and 10% of Republicans, according to an October poll from NBC.
Thank you, Haley, so much for that reporting. And also now joining us is IDS reporter Shar Jones. Shar, what do you have for us in this discussion regarding public health?
I mean, thank you for asking me that question, but health is honestly the most paramount thing to human life. I mean, if we're not in good health, then what are we? So it's on the ballot this year in the biggest way yet, especially following this COVID-19 pandemic. That is still a concern for many of our state representatives and state senators. And also the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which Haley talked about just now. Understanding where Indiana politicians stand on these issues is key for forecasting our future. So Indiana senators and representatives have pushed forward key health legislation each year, but this year's ballot things are really encompassing the cost of prescription drugs, lowering those costs, and making sure that that doesn't contribute to the ongoing opiate epidemic that is really attacking Northwest and Southern Indiana. So we're just really kind of looking for a bunch of different key issues, but the bipartisan things that we're focusing on are the opiate epidemic and also creating affordable health care for uninsured Hoosiers.
For sure. Thank you both so much for that context.
You know, I think this panel is important just because of, you know, the intersectionality that we're seeing with abortion as healthcare, but also just public health in general. You mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, and, you know, we're still seeing effects from that years down the line in this midterm election. What do you think? Do you think public health is still front of mind for these voters who are now voting with their economy as their top issue, regardless of the fact that that is kind of like a downstream from the impact of COVID-19?
I definitely think it should be, at the very least. Just because I know we're focused on the economy and making sure that it doesn't, you know, crash and go downhill, but putting these investments towards public health and mental health are going to end up benefiting in the long run, because these kind of investments are going to help incentivize a lot of people to go into the public health field, which a lot of people already want to become doctors, but it's a good thing to have more, honestly, right?
For sure. And, you know, a large part of public health, I feel like that, you know, it's starting to become talked about a bit more, a bit less stigmatized than it already is mental health. So how is mental health being addressed by each party, if it is being addressed?
Oh, definitely. Mental health is really a bipartisan issue on this ballot. But in the case of Democrat versus Republican, a lot of the Democrats are focusing on opening more clinics and having more counselors, that sort of situation, and a lot of more harm reduction clinics, that sort of stuff. But the Republicans, on the other hand, are thinking about mental health in forms of police and that kind of stuff. So basically, they're thinking about investing in mental health task forces within the police department so that our law enforcement can better understand the mental health things that go into different kinds of crimes. And a lot of these people will also bring into this putting in paid work in jail in order to help those people who have been placed in there due to the opiate pandemic. We're seeing this a lot with District 62 in particular. I feel like Dave Hall, the Republican person for that district, he's really the representation of like the quintessential Republican ballot for mental health in general.
Very interesting. And, you know, I think a lot of this mental health stuff can just come with, you know, government putting certain restrictions on you. And one of those that we're started to see since the summer is the overturning of Roe v. Wade and what that does for abortion legislation. So what do you foresee for that legislation following this midterm?
Yeah, so far we have these 5 issues on the ballots in Montana, Michigan, California, and Kentucky. But before that, according to the New York Times, most abortions have been banned in at least 13 states. Georgia is also banning abortion at about 6 weeks of pregnancy. And bigger than that, abortion access in many states is still being fought out in the court system. So this is still developing.
Yeah, and going along with that, you know, what states have trigger laws? I know you mentioned, you know, some states are currently voting on this on their ballot, but what states have trigger laws, you know, regarding abortion?
Yeah, so in Kentucky, according to WFPL News, which is an NPR affiliate down there. The Kentucky Court of Appeals actually, back in August, granted the state attorney general the request to enforce Kentucky's, both their trigger law down there back into effect, and the ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Michigan had an abortion law that predated Roe versus Wade, but it is currently being blocked in the courts, according to the New York Times. And Montana, in 2021, the legislature passed 3 anti-abortion laws, but those have been blocked in the courts as well since last year. And there are also other developments in other states.
Well, yeah. And thank you both joining us. Shar Jones from the IDS, Haley Ryan also from the IDS. What an amazing discussion we've been having, and just a lot of context provided in your reporting. So we really do appreciate that work, you guys. And we're coming up on 10 p.m. closures are happening right now. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll bring you those updates right after our break. And you are watching the IUSTV live election night coverage. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to our live election night coverage here on IUSTV. We are watching a number of Senate races and congressional races, but the AP has also called the race for governor in Vermont, the Republican incumbent Phil Scott.
Right, and now moving on to some House updates. In Texas, Greg Casar, Democrat, won his House District 35. Over in New York, Nicole Malakakis, Republican incumbent, won District 11. And in Alabama, Jerry Carl, Republican incumbent, won District 1. Over in South Dakota, Dusty Johnson, Republican incumbent, also won District 1. Alabama, Mike Rogers, Republican incumbent, won District 3. And Gary Palmer, Republican incumbent, won District 6.
And to recap some of those big results of the night here in Indiana, Todd Young, the Republican incumbent, won that Senate election. And down in Florida, Marco Rubio, another Republican incumbent, has been projected to win by the AP. Now, locally, Secretary of State has been called in favor of Destiny Wells, a Democrat. Now, this, I think, I was surprised to hear about this one. So that's definitely a shock that they leaned Democrat when traditionally in the past we've seen them lean as a Republican for Secretary of State.
And, this specific Secretary of State race is just very interesting considering the recent controversy with the Republican candidate on the ballot for that. So those results did come in, and we had an IDS reporter on earlier, Nadia Sharf, and she provided a lot of context into that election and that race concerning Diego Morales, as he actually used to work for Mike Pence when he was governor of Indiana, and Diego Morales has also had a few other controversies recently about possible voter fraud. The Indiana Star did some reporting on that and broke that news as well. So definitely a really interesting result to see a Democrat win the Secretary of State for this area.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how that affects Indiana going forward. Now, to continue kind of some updates going on right now, Democrat Denai Brooks has been named Auditor of State. The Treasurer of State has been called for Jessica McClellan, District 9 Representative Matthew Fife. District 61 has been called for Matt Pierce, a Democrat and the only candidate for that district.
And we are also following multiple Senate races, the Georgia Senate race, which is more than likely going to determine the outcome of Senate control. That one still remains too close to call. I'm constantly updating these numbers here. There's a lot of votes not yet reported in those Atlanta suburbs. I'm not sure if we could get the map up on the screen here, but a lot of Republican counties up north. We were talking with Kenny Smith, our advisor. He was running through, and also Emma Watson. She has a lot of knowledge of this area. Arizona is another one that we are keeping an eye on. There's a lot of legal matters that is being settled in Maricopa County right now in regards to the way that election has gone today. They have about 50% of the vote in there. The Senate race, Mark Kelly is up by about 20% there, but still 40% of the vote is in. So a lot of these races have a lot of outstanding vote. Pennsylvania might take a long time to come in, but Philly votes, there's still plenty of votes in Philly and the Philly suburbs to come in, but John Fetterman still has the lead in that race.
Right, and I think, you touched on a lot of good points. Jumping to Arizona really quickly, Maricopa County is always a county, I feel like, that is brought up in the elections. There's just so much of the population that lives in that area. And, briefly going back into Georgia, how you were mentioning, Ashton, Georgia's only seeing 67% of their voting right now. Yeah. And that's, there's going to be a lot more coming in that. And also you have to think that recently, some voters in Georgia and Cobb County didn't receive their mail-in ballots, so now they can have up till November 14th to send in their ballots from Cobb County. So that could affect some stuff too. 2 years ago, it got down to the nitty-gritty in Georgia.
And it could all, this could all, just like 2 years ago, come down to a runoff.
Right, for sure.
In Georgia, if neither candidate gets to that 50% threshold, there goes to a runoff, which would be in later December. So we could very well have, 50 Republican seats. Pennsylvania could be called for Fetterman, and then we're waiting on on Georgia for that runoff.
Exactly. And also in Pennsylvania, only 46% of the voting has been, counted right now. And John Fetterman is at 51.7% of the votes. Mehmet Oz is at 46. Like we said, only 46% of those votes have been counted, but it's a really interesting race. That last debate really kind of shifted things, in that race between Fetterman and Oz for Senate. As Fetterman, he suffered from a stroke back in May, and so this was the first time people were really seeing him since then, as he wasn't releasing all of his medical records, for what he was going through. So it's been really interesting since then to see polling, and now to look at this. Like we said, though, it's only 46%.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if we're going to see some of these numbers really come in tonight, maybe not even tomorrow, maybe not this week again with Cobb County. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how these numbers continue to shift throughout the night. Well, Democrats and Republicans have been fighting a very close race, as you can see, all election season. So much so that Democrats are taking major chances. IUSTV reporter Carly Rasmussen is in studio with more.
We have seen since back in the primaries that is going to have a significant influence on the results that we see come over tonight, over the next few days and over the next few weeks, is how the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee's tactic of significantly funding far-right conservative candidates in the primaries. Their idea is that this nominee would be more likely to be defeated by a Democratic candidate due to their extremism in the official election, something that we're going to start to see being played out. There was about $500,000 spent to air ads boosting John Gibbs, a Michigan Republican representative candidate, over the incumbent Republican Peter Meijer. Gibbs, the candidate now being promoted with the DCCC funds, is endorsed by former President Donald Trump, whereas incumbent Meijer voted to impeach Trump last year while he was in office. Right now, Hillary Schloten is ahead of Gibbs at 58%, with Gibbs at 38.7%. Again, not all these votes have been counted, but that is just where the polls are standing right now. Another state that we're seeing this tactic being played out in is Pennsylvania, a state in general that we're all keeping our eyes and ears on. But again, the DCC delegated funds to Doug Mastriano, the governor candidate, right before he secured the Republican gubernatorial nomination. Mastriano is an extreme election denier and is known for his innately conservative views. Whereas Democrat Josh Shapiro is currently ahead of Mastriano in the polls, with Shapiro at 56.6% and Mastriano at 41.6%. I know the other reporters had mentioned that Pennsylvania, they're not even halfway through those votes. But again, that's where we're standing. I mean, I guess we're going to start to see play out, is this tactic really working? I guess right now, looking at those numbers, it is, but we're not going to know until the coming days. The decision to back these candidates is not incredibly popular throughout the party, though. Democratic representative from Florida, Stephanie Murphy, said, quote, "No race is worth compromising your values in that way," end quote. Herself and others feel that it is too risky of a play, one that could potentially leave MAGA Republicans in power. Murphy also mentioned that many Democrats are facing threats of violence due to their stance in the January 6 hearings, and having the party boost those who may have supported or even participated in the violence is, quote, mind-blowing. Those who are in support of the tactic are hopeful that it will be successful in gaining leverage in the House, but the issue is causing a significant rift in the party, and the impact of these choices should become clear in the coming days.
For that reporting. And before we jump into that discussion, we want to make a clarification real quick about what we were talking about earlier. Diego Morales is the leading Secretary of State in that race, and then Wells is leading in Monroe County. We just want to clarify that for our viewers. Also, really quickly before we jump into this conversation that Carly was reporting on earlier, we want to point out Georgia really quickly. Georgia's receiving 68% of reporting right now for their votes, and Herschel Walker is in the lead. According to AP right now, he has 49.4% of the votes. Raphael Warnock is closely trailing that with 48.7%.
Wow.
So after that little update, now, Carly, going back to your discussion on this funding between Democrats and Republicans, do you think this will be a successful tactic after what you've seen reporting?
I'm not sure. And as I mentioned, they're getting some of these numbers in, and so far it looks hopeful for the Democrats. I mean, their candidates are up in the polls, but we're not going to see that. These are heavily contested areas, especially Pennsylvania. We're not going to see these numbers come in until, the coming days and maybe even the coming weeks. So, I can't make a statement now, but I guess at the preemptive look, yes. Is it worth it? That's something that we'll have to come to find out, but yeah, it might work.
One race that I think it might, the polls have said so would be the Pennsylvania governor's race.
Right.
Doug Mastriano, Democrats really funded that primary fight to get him into that spot so that Josh Shapiro would have an easier race at governor. And currently, with about half of the vote in, he's got about 15% up on Doug Mastriano. So that might be one that is beneficial. Ohio, possibly J.D. Vance, but I mean, from what I've been seeing out of Ohio right now, in terms of the shift from 2020, there's actually a lot more Democratic vote in that race, which Tim Ryan said would happen going into today. So it might work out in Ohio, but it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, I mean, personally, it's a risky move, I feel like, in general. But we'll see, I guess. Yeah. But I think something that's really interesting about this whole tactic is that it really is polarizing the Democratic Party within itself. I mean, you have representatives like Murphy who are just vehemently against this and saying that it is just going against all of their ideals and everything that they've stood for, especially in the wake of the January 6th hearings and in the wake of January 6th in general. So I'm not exactly sure if the DCCC really, thought that was going to be an outcome from this at all. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about that too.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. I'm not as familiar with this, so I feel like I can't necessarily say what I think is going to happen. I do think it's something really interesting, and it's something, fundraising isn't always necessarily talked about when we're talking about political coverage and campaigns, considering that, we have one kind of opposite party kind of pushing for another forward. Like, historically, we haven't really seen something like that before. So I think, this midterm election, it's anticipated, like, highly motivated for a lot of people and for a lot of different reasons. And obviously this is just one tactic on how one party is trying to achieve their success.
And I think there's going to be, some of the reps might feel almost a level of betrayal that comes from their committee, and just like, it's just going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, honestly, it's interesting because, we talked earlier about specific issues that got people out to vote. Democrats really motivated their voters on the issues of abortion, access to reproductive rights. And then when you have these these tactics to get people to be the person that they want to represent, or to in that I'm really losing my train of thought here.
Hey,
but
it's late. We've been here for a while, so it's okay.
It's okay.
But it really just shows like the two different types of messages. Democrats really could have focused on one message. It's more than just the economy. And they could have probably gotten a lot more voters than having to go with a tactic of putting someone in that position that would be easier for them to, because honestly it's going to come back to bite them in the butt in some of these races.
Right. And I think it's just, you mentioned this earlier, if we were having this midterm election in the middle of the summer, this would be an entirely different race.
Absolutely.
And Democrats would not be almost grasping at straws here to support these candidates that they have been speaking out against for the last, 6 years since Trump was in office, and supporting them. They push them through their campaign trail.
Right.
I think it's just an issue election.
And I agree with what you're saying, and I want to bring up the point Ashton made earlier. It's about who's motivated to get to the polls. And, we're not going to see that, though. We're not going to see all those results come in for a few weeks, possibly. So it's really, I think, what you said earlier. It's about motivation.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the turnout looks like. We had record turnout in 2020. 2018 was obviously more of a motivator for people to get out and vote. The turnout was a little bit higher. So I'm not sure where this one will go. I know here in Monroe County, the turnout was a lot lower than what it was back in 2018. But I think once we move forward tonight, or however long it takes for all these results to officially come in, Democrats are probably going to take a step back and take a look at what message they want to move forward, because they will have to deal with a Republican government if they end up taking control of the Senate and the House for the next 2 years until the next election. And we have already some talks about 2024. So I'm sure a lot of re-imaging will happen once we get to next year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Carly, thank you so much for that reporting. Really interesting topic that hasn't really been talked about a lot in media coverage of, the campaigns right now. So thank you for that. And coming up after the break, we'll have the latest polling updates. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to our IUSTV News midterm election special, and we have some updates for you guys. In Georgia, Walker is leading with 22,000 votes as they are 82% in right now, and many races in Indiana, where we currently are, have been called. Indiana District 1 is one of the last to be named. Democrat Frank Mervyn is leading over opponent Jennifer Ruth Green with a 7,000 vote difference with 75% of votes in. And to recap the other Indiana congressional districts, District 2, Rudy Yakum, Republican, won their seat. District 3, Jim Banks, also Republican. District 4, Jim Baird, also Republican. District 5, Victoria Sparks, a Republican. And continuing along, District 6, Greg Pence, a Republican. District 7, Andre Carson, Democrat. In District 8, Larry Bouchon is pulling away with the lead. And District 9, Aaron Hochin also has a significant lead. And in Wisconsin, for the Senate, 50% are in, and Mandela Barnes is leading by 20,000 votes.
In Arizona House District 1, we have Democrat Jevin Hodge is leading against Republican incumbent Schwett Zeckert by 29,000 votes with 57% of the votes in. This is one of the key races for Democrats in order to keep the House. And in District 2 for Arizona, incumbent O'Callaghan is losing. Arizona Kelly is leading by 158,000 votes with 42% in.
And speaking on the matter of Arizona, there's been a lot of talk in Maricopa County. I know there's been a lot of legal matters in that county today. 52% of the vote is in. So interesting to see what will come out of the legal battles in that county. I know that was a very hot spot in the 2020 election. So with Kelly up now, with still plenty of vote to count in the Phoenix and Tucson suburbs, it'll be interesting to see what happens as the night continues.
Moving over to some Senate updates, we have Colorado, Michael Bennet, Democratic incumbent, as a projected winner. In Missouri, Eric Schmidt, Republican. Ohio, we have Republican Vance is pulling away with 78% of the votes in.
And those are just some of the updates right now. But earlier this evening, IUSTV reporter Olivia Oliver sat down with IUSTV
what issues are you seeing?
Political analyst David Wolfbender to hear more about the predictions for the evening. Take a look.
What issues are you seeing Democrats campaign on versus Republicans? What are they kind of basing their campaigns around, do you think?
Yeah, this is a good question, and this is pretty difficult because we don't really have the best understanding of what necessarily they should have been attacking. But a lot of them really used former President Trump as the centerpiece of their campaign. Democrats are really good at running against issues instead of running for issues, and I think that this election was no exception, but 54% of people in the CNN exit poll that just came out a few minutes ago said that Donald Trump was not a factor in their vote today. So there's some evidence to suggest that maybe they should have focused on some more key issues heading down the issue ballot. And then I also think the Democrats were campaigning and trying to get elected off of the swarm of anti-abortion legislation that was passed all across the country, including here in Indiana. And I think for a period of time that was really, really working. And I actually do think it's going to work in certain areas of our state and certain areas of states around the country. But I don't know if it's going to be able to win elections at the 50% mark that I think some of them need to hit tonight.
Right. So you kind of said, Republicans are, kind of pulling ahead a little bit, or at least that's what a lot of people are predicting. So if Republicans do gain control, how do you think that will affect Biden's presidency and his effectiveness in his administration?
It's an important question for sure. And, I don't like to, get into too many predictions about what the Republicans will do because I'm so often wrong on what the Republicans will do. But I have no doubt in my mind that they'll jump on the first opportunity to impeach President Biden. I really do think that that's going to be something, I'm just looking at the candidates who are in line to get elected on the Republican side. If they end up getting into power, that could have serious effect on President Biden's agenda. And I think that, that could be something we see in the near future.
Well, what a great interview, and hearing that perspective from a student is really interesting. And just a few weeks ago, I reported on the scarcity of election poll workers and how vital their job is during early voting and on Election Day. Check it out.
Election approaches, the job of a poll worker is more important than ever.
If we didn't have the poll workers, we could do all the work that we wanted and the election would not happen. It takes the community to step forward and be able to be a part of it.
Poll workers are assigned a voting site and oversee security in the voting process. But counties across the nation, like Monroe County, struggle to have enough poll workers during the election, which is no new trend.
You have to have poll workers because there's different steps involved in voting. And if there's no one there to manage those steps, then the voter won't be able to vote.
So what does the in-person voting process look like here in Monroe County? Well, the first thing a voter is going to do is come over here and verify all their information. They'll then get a barcode printed and place it on this packet. Voters will then take their packet and scan their barcode to receive their ballot. Voters then make their way over to a voting booth to fill out their ballot in privacy.
Everyone that works in here, no matter what their position, the reason that we're here is to make it as easy as possible for people to vote.
Both Democrats and Republicans fill these positions and receive training to ensure election integrity.
We come to the election, it's never about politics, even though the whole thing seems like it is. It is really carrying on the election, making it successful, and keeping the integrity of the election.
To be a poll worker in Monroe County, you must be a registered voter and resident here and be at least 18 years old. For Hoosier News Source, I'm Ella Rhodes.
Polls here in Monroe County closed at 7 p.m. tonight, and 33,847 people voted here today. That's only 34% of registered voters in the county, a lower number than they had originally expected, but just happy that people are out there, you know?
Yeah, and also lower than back in the 2018 midterms. Well, coming up after the break, we will have more on the latest poll updates, potentially see if we can have any more races called. Stay with us.
All right, welcome back to our IUSTV News midterm election coverage, and we've been coming with updates all throughout the hours we've been here.
Long
but
time.
We do want to make a correction from earlier. In Wisconsin for the Senate, Democrat Mandela Barnes is leading with 1,000 votes against Republican incumbent Ronald Johnson. And over in the House right now, Democrats are holding 58 seats and Republicans have 101. 218 are needed for a majority.
Erie County in Pennsylvania is flipped in favor of John Fetterman with 80% of the votes in. This county was very important for Republicans in 2016 and Democrats later in 2020. But enough of those updates. We're now going to pass it over to Ashton Hackman at the Wall for some updates. Ashton.
Probably go to Pennsylvania first. We have the live numbers up here. I'm not sure if it's able to go. Is it able to go like countywide? Actually, if you click it. Oh, there you go. That works. Yeah, Erie County would be up close to the lake. If you click, let me step aside.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. See, we're figuring things out here. Yeah, Erie County. There's still, let me find where I'm at. 62% reporting. Yeah, I'm interested to see how much is still left to count in the Philly suburbs and maybe out in Pittsburgh. But Fetterman there with a slight lead. I'm sure this is going to come down to mail-in voting that will be counted later tonight, probably into tomorrow. And then if we want to go back to, actually over into Ohio, this is a state that the Democratic vote is better than it was in 2020, but still not enough. J.D. Vance has a pretty large lead there, which that is already a Republican state. So if he wins that, Democrats would still have a chance. 86% has reported. So I would assume that race is probably getting close to being called. Another one here is in Wisconsin. We mentioned that earlier there. Ron Johnson, Democrats have been trying for cycle after cycle to get him out of office. This has been going back and forth all day, about 62% in. I'd have to look at the numbers more carefully, but there's still some Republican votes out there. So Ron Johnson looks as if that one is pulling away. Arizona, there has been a lot of numbers that have been out of Arizona, a lot of legal challenges in Maricopa County. Looks like Kelly has a pretty substantial lead there. Can we flip over to the governor's race up at the top? Carrie Lake, also in Arizona. Would like to see how she is doing in terms of that parallel. And this is something that I've been watching with a lot of races here. Georgia, Brian Kemp seems to be doing a little bit better than Herschel Walker in terms of the vote numbers. So they're both on the same ticket. Herschel Walker seems to not be as up in the numbers as much as Kemp is. It looks like Katie Hobbs is running pretty similar to where Kelly is now. Let's see where we can go from here. And actually, it looks like AP just called. Oh wait, no, that's governor. Never mind. I'm getting sidetracked here. Let's go over to the prediction map up at the top and see where things are. Yep, right there at the top, and time things out here. So I put in Ohio and North Carolina. Let's say for hypothetical purposes, Ron Johnson wins in Wisconsin. You can click Wisconsin. And then let's switch our color here from red to blue over on the side. Leans it. Either one, doesn't matter. We'll give Pennsylvania to Fetterman if he might be days until we get that. We have no numbers out of Nevada. I'm not sure why that is. Polls closed about probably an hour or so ago. So Nevada's next up, and also Utah. There's an independent, Evan McMullen. He ran in 2016 as an independent. He is facing off against Mike Lee there. Then he's not up as much as Lee is in the polls, and he also said he would not caucus with either Republicans or Democrats. So if he were to win, that wouldn't change the makeup of the Senate at all. So.
Right, and a lot of interesting possibilities from that map. Super interesting stuff. Thank you, Ashton, for kind of showing us what could happen, what could not happen. Like we said, and you just said, we might not have some of these results for a few weeks possibly, considering Georgia and Pennsylvania, two very important states and their races there. And something we need to address also in just elections is misinformation. And it's been a growing concern, but what exactly is it? Misinformation is the dissemination of false, inaccurate information. Those conveying the misinformation believe it to be true and spread false information unintentionally. This is a key distinction from disinformation, which is false and intentionally told. Misinformation can be found anywhere, but has become a growing issue on social media. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and other platforms can make it difficult to determine what is true and what is false. IU professor Jason Pfeiffer describes the definition of misinformation.
Unintentional instances of passing along or sharing or distributing information, and information that maybe is lacking in quality or accuracy.
And now there are steps you can take to avoid falling into the misinformation trap. Fact-checking and verifying sources are two simple ways to ensure you are receiving and sharing accurate information.
2 weeks ago, I was able to sit down with a 2022 poll worker. I'm sure he had an absolutely great day today. But to hear his predictions on this year's election, as well as a former Indiana House Speaker. Both were able to give key insight into the midterms. Let's hear what they had to say.
Sean Byrne is a former Major General of the U.S. Army. Now, he's an IU professor and, as of 2022, an Indiana poll worker for Marion County.
I will be a poll worker for the first time on Election Day. I will work at Hinkle Fieldhouse in Indianapolis.
But verifying voter identification will not be his only task.
I think it's a great opportunity for me to be engaged in the process as best as possible. And I don't need anything to build up my confidence in the system, but it will be good that I can, after the fact, talk to people and say, hey, I've been there, I've seen it.
Election fraud has been a conservative worry and a campaign tool against the Democrats since Donald Trump's presidential defeat in 2020. John R. Gregg is an IU adjunct and former Speaker for Indiana House of Representatives. He says that this issue is a worry for him heading into the midterms.
You know what I'm really worried about? We're going to see people after this election maintain fraud, and the elections weren't fair, and I loathe that. I think that's wrong. They're doing a great detriment to our country. Is our election system perfect? No, but I know of no case where there was fraud the way they like to make it out. These are just bullies.
Regardless of the Election Day outcome, there are a number of hot topic issues that will bring voters to the polls no matter what. But former Speaker Gregg is not sure if election night will give Americans the answers they want.
It's going to be interesting to see if the whole issue of the reversal of Roe v. Wade is a blessing to the Democrats and a curse to the Republicans, or vice versa. It's going to do something, just don't know, and we still may not be able to know and draw a conclusion after it.
What Speaker Gregg said is so true, and it's something that I feel like we're all having to remind ourselves as the night goes on. You know, as much as we want this confirmation, we're not going to get it for everything that we want, but I think that's kind of what makes it so exciting.
Right, for sure. Patience is key, and I feel like, you know, I'm a very impatient person, I'll admit it, so it's just definitely testing my patience here, and we've been here for a while now. 3 hours? 4 hours?
It's okay. You don't have to be good at math right now. It's late.
Math is going out the window.
Exactly. Yeah, even though we are looking at number of votes in places. But, you know, we've been here for a while, and we are being patient. And, you know, it just shows, you know, in the next coming weeks, we mentioned it earlier, like, we might not know exactly what's happening in a few states. So patience is definitely key.
Yeah. I know Ashton said earlier he's getting a little tired, so how you feeling?
Yeah, it's been a long day. I've been up early this morning, late last night, but, you know, this is a really tremendous thing that we are putting on for people to watch, and I think, you know, our coverage is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it's cool that, you know, we're able to kind of have a local insight, but also there's so many resources out there that are giving us the national updates. It's awesome.
Right. And, you know, the fact that we are students and we're able to put this election coverage together is just absolutely amazing. This is all student reporting, and whether we're getting our information, you know, from AP, New York Times, Washington Post, we're vetting our information, we're looking at our research, and it's just really amazing that we're able to put this all together, one, for other students to watch, and also just to show to ourselves that we're not just student journalists, we're also professional journalists as well.
That's right. And as we head into the final push for this live stream, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back with the latest polling updates. Stay with us. Welcome back. Several races across the country have been called for House seats. Democrats are now holding 77 seats, but Republicans still have the lead with 126 currently being held. 218 is needed for a majority. Down in Georgia, Herschel Walker is still just barely leading at 49.2% versus Raphael Warnock at 48.8%, according to the AP. They have 79% of the votes in. He is just around 18,000 votes ahead, and moving up into Pennsylvania, John Fetterman is in the lead with 49.3% versus Republican Mehmet Oz at 48.7%. There in Pennsylvania, they have 64% of the votes currently in.
And over also in the Senate, the AP has called California's Senate race for Alex Padilla, Democrat, and their governor race for Gavin Newsom, also Democrat and the incumbent. And Chuck Grassley has been called for the Iowa Senate. Democrats now hold 41 seats, and Republicans hold 43.
And there are still plenty of races that we are waiting for results on. The Georgia governor's race, Brian Kemp is running up a little bit higher than where Herschel Walker is in that race. Brian Kemp, who survived that primary back in the summer, he's taking on Stacey Abrams in that 2018 rematch. Also, the Georgia Senate, we mentioned that earlier. Herschel Walker has a slight lead still, but it is important to note that if neither candidate gets to 50%, that one will be heading to a runoff, which neither is at 50% now. Also, Pennsylvania governor, and Doug Mastriano and Josh Shapiro. That one is a little more open for Shapiro than the Pennsylvania Senate race, which we are also standing by on for that one as well. 67% of the vote is in there. With Fetterman and Oz in a tight battle. Also out west, Arizona governor Kari Lake is looking to keep the Republican momentum alive in the governorship in that state. She's taking on Katie Hobbs, the current Secretary of State. So if Kari Lake wins, Katie Hobbs could certify her results as Secretary of State. A little bit interesting fact note I had to throw in there. Arizona Senate, there's also a race there. Mark Kelly is looking to get a full 6-year term. He was elected back in 2020, that special election, taking on Blake Masters. And Ohio Senate, J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan, I suspect that one will be called rather soon. Almost 90% of the vote is in, and J.D. Vance's lead continues to grow there. And Nevada, we didn't pull up the graphic there, but no results are in yet from the state of Nevada, but that one will definitely determine who controls the Senate.
Right, and that's a lot to watch out for tonight and for the next couple days.
Go to sleep
possibly
first.
Yeah,
maybe
go take a nap. Wait, not nap. It's like 11:50 p.m. Like probably go to bed. But we just, as we're wrapping up the night and we had those latest updates, we want to thank everybody who's been watching, all of our families and friends supporting us. We really do greatly appreciate it. Also, shout out to all the reporters that we've had and all the segments they've written. And it's just really been really great work from all these student journalists. And obviously, we've been collaborating tonight with the IDS and WIUX. So we are very appreciative of our partnership with those two student media organizations here at Indiana University in the media school. None of this would be possible also without our wonderful production team behind the scenes. This is all student run, all student produced, all student reported, literally students put together all of this. So it is quite amazing to see all of this come together. As a senior, I never imagined I'd get to do something like this ever. So it's really exciting, and I'm so happy I get to share it with this wonderful news department at IUSTV. And we really just thank you guys all for tuning in and watching. And this has been the IUSTV News Midterm Live Election Coverage. Thank you guys and have a good night. Try to get some sleep.
Yeah. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, sleep is...
you.